Imagine a couple you probably know, or maybe you see them in the mirror every morning. They did everything right. College degrees, stable careers, a wedding with hopeful smiles, and the proud moment of buying a house in a good neighborhood with decent schools and clean sidewalks. On paper, they are winning. Together, they make well into six figures, the kind of number that once sounded like a guaranteed ticket to financial freedom. Friends assume they're thriving. Family thinks they've made it. But late at night, when the kids are finally asleep and the house is quiet, a different truth whispers in the background. Why does it still feel so tight? Why does the bank account never quite breathe? Why does one surprise bill feel like a mini heart attack instead of a small inconvenience? Last month, the car needed a repair, and it quietly slid onto a credit card. Not because they're irresponsible, not because they're reckless, but because somehow, despite two full-time incomes, there isn't much room left at the end of the month. They're exhausted, juggling meetings, commutes, school pickups, deadlines, and endless notifications. They pass each other in the hallway more than they actually sit down together. And the strangest part is this: they didn't mess up. They followed the exact blueprint society handed them. Study hard, get good jobs, combine incomes, buy a home, build a life. So why does it feel less like freedom and more like running on a treadmill that never slows down? If that question hits a little too close to home, you're not alone, and you're not crazy. There is a hidden story behind modern middle-class life that almost nobody explains clearly. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. For decades, we've been told that two incomes automatically equal more security, more comfort, more opportunity. It seems obvious, almost mathematical. If one income could support a family in the past, then two incomes today should mean extra savings, nicer vacations, and a sense of financial peace. Yet millions of American households are discovering the opposite reality. They earn more than previous generations ever did, but feel more fragile, more stressed, and more one emergency away from chaos. This isn't just about personal budgeting mistakes or lack of discipline. It's a deeper structural shift that quietly reshaped how middle-class life works in America. To understand it, picture the timeline of a typical family several decades ago. One primary earner, one parent managing the home, modest house, used car in the driveway, simple vacations, but a crucial ingredient: margin. There was breathing room in the budget. If the main earner lost a job, the other parent could step into the workforce as a backup plan. That second income was like an emergency parachute, rarely needed but incredibly powerful when things went wrong. Fast forward to today, and the script flipped without most people noticing. Now both partners work not as a backup, but as a baseline requirement just to maintain a standard middle-class life. Housing costs surged, healthcare costs exploded, childcare became a major expense, and education costs climbed higher every decade. Each of these changes alone might have been manageable, but together they formed a quiet squeeze that absorbed the entire second paycheck. What once would have been extra security slowly became necessary, just to keep the lights on and the mortgage paid. The result is a subtle psychological trap. When you look at your combined income on paper, it feels large, powerful, and reassuring. It should translate into wealth building, right? But daily life tells a different story. The mortgage is sized for two incomes: the cars, the commuting, the daycare, the insurance, the groceries, the little conveniences that buy back a few minutes of sanity after a long workday, all stack up quietly. None of them feel extravagant in isolation. They feel normal, even responsible. Yet together, they consume nearly everything. This is where the stress truly begins, because the household isn't just living on two incomes, it is dependent on two incomes. Remove one paycheck, even temporarily, and the entire structure trembles. That's a very different kind of financial life than the one many people imagine when they picture success. It's the difference between looking wealthy and being resilient. And resilience is what determines whether a single job loss, medical issue, or family emergency becomes a manageable setback or a financial crisis. What makes this story even more compelling is that the couple at the center of it isn't irresponsible or careless. They are disciplined, educated, and hardworking. They budget, they plan, they try to save, yet they still feel stuck, and that feeling creates confusion and quiet shame, as if they must be doing something wrong. But the truth is, they're often reacting rationally to a system where key middle-class expenses rose faster than income growth for decades. Housing especially became the anchor that tied everything together. When two-income households became common, lenders could approve larger mortgages, sellers could raise prices, and neighborhoods with strong schools became bidding wars fueled by dual paychecks. Families weren't just buying homes, they were buying access to opportunity for their children. And that made the decision feel non-negotiable. Over time, the price of entry to that opportunity rose so high that stepping down to one income began to feel impossible, even if one partner wanted more flexibility or needed to step back for health, caregiving, or simply burnout. That's how the treadmill effect quietly forms. Every raise, every promotion, every new financial milestone should create more freedom. But instead, it often locks in higher fixed costs that require maintaining that same pace forever. The couple keeps running, not because they love the speed, but because slowing down suddenly feels dangerous. And this is where the emotional core of the story lives, not in spreadsheets, but in daily life. The rushed mornings, the guilt of missing moments with kids, the late night conversations about bills, the constant background hum of, we can't mess this up because everything depends on both of us working. By the time they realize what's happening, the structure of their life is already built around two nonstop incomes, and stepping off the treadmill feels riskier than staying on it. This is the modern paradox of success in America. Earning more money than ever before while feeling like there's less margin for error than previous generations had with less income. And understanding this paradox is the first step toward breaking free from it. Because once you recognize that the problem isn't just how much you earn, but how much of your life is structured around needing every dollar of it, you start to see your financial choices in a completely different light. Not as isolated spending decisions, but as pieces of a larger system that either gives you flexibility or quietly takes it away. Now let's dig deeper into the invisible math that turns a second income from a blessing into a dependency, because this is where the story becomes uncomfortably real for many households. Picture that same couple again, both working full-time, both earning solid salaries, bringing in what looks like a powerful combined income. On paper, the second paycheck appears to be the engine that should accelerate their wealth building, but in reality, that second paycheck is often already spoken for before it even lands in the bank. First come the taxes. And this part is subtle but important. In a progressive tax system, the additional income often gets taxed at higher marginal rates than the first. The result is that the second earner's take-home pay is significantly smaller than the headline salary suggests. But the drain doesn't stop there. With two careers come two commutes, which means more fuel, more maintenance, possibly a second vehicle, higher insurance, and the invisible cost of time lost sitting in traffic instead of doing anything restorative or productive. Then comes childcare for families with kids, a cost that can rival a second mortgage in many parts of the country. Daycare, after-school programs, summer camps, babysitters for late meetings, each one reasonable on its own, but collectively forming a massive annual expense that directly exists because both parents must be at work. Add to that the quiet category of convenience spending. The meals ordered because nobody has the energy to cook after a 10-hour workday. The cleaning services hired to keep the house functioning. The subscriptions, the quick fixes, the little purchases that buy back slivers of time in an otherwise overloaded schedule. None of these choices are signs of laziness or poor discipline. They are logical responses to two people trying to juggle full-time careers and a household at the same time. But when you step back and total it all up, something startling often appears. The actual net contribution of the second income, after taxes, childcare, commuting, and convenience costs, can be far smaller than expected, sometimes shockingly small compared to the emotional and physical energy required to earn it. Yet here's the psychological twist that keeps the cycle going. Because the gross combined income number looks large, families make long-term commitments based on that larger number. They qualify for bigger mortgages, finance nicer cars, move into higher-cost neighborhoods, and enroll their kids in more activities, all of which feel justified because technically, with both incomes flowing steadily, they can afford it. The problem is that these decisions quietly convert what should have been optional income into mandatory income. Suddenly, the household isn't just benefiting from two paychecks. It is structurally dependent on both of them showing up every single month without interruption. That dependency removes one of the most valuable forms of financial security, flexibility. In earlier eras, the second potential income acted as a reserve that could be activated during emergencies. Today, that reserve is already deployed just to maintain baseline expenses, which means there is no buffer left if one partner loses a job, gets sick, needs to care for a family member, or simply burns out. And burnout is a word that deserves attention here, because financial models often ignore the human cost of sustaining two intense careers indefinitely. The couple starts to feel constantly tired, always on a schedule, always negotiating logistics, always trying to squeeze quality family time into the leftover spaces between obligations. They're succeeding by external metrics, but internally, they're running on fumes. And that exhaustion itself creates more spending and less long-term planning, reinforcing the cycle. Meanwhile, the larger economic environment amplifies the pressure. Housing markets in desirable areas with good schools have been bid up by dual-income households competing for the same limited inventory. When everyone brings two paychecks to the table, the baseline price adjusts upward until two incomes become the minimum requirement rather than the advantage. Education follows a similar pattern, as access to better public schools is often tied to more expensive neighborhoods, effectively converting educational opportunity into a higher housing cost rather than a direct tuition bill. Healthcare costs continue to rise. Insurance premiums increase, and college savings loom in the background as a future obligation that feels too important to ignore. Each of these forces nudges the family toward maintaining their current earning level at all costs because stepping down even temporarily could jeopardize multiple pillars of their lifestyle at once. Over time, this creates a fragile equilibrium. Everything works as long as nothing goes wrong. The jobs must remain stable, the health must hold, the childcare must be available, the housing market must cooperate, and the family must keep performing at a high level year after year. It's like building a life that runs perfectly at full speed, but has very little tolerance for sudden shocks. When viewed this way, the stress many dual-income households feel isn't irrational anxiety. It's a rational response to living in a system with very little margin for error. They are not failing at money. They are operating in an environment where fixed costs have expanded to meet and often consume every dollar they earn. And this is why so many people look at their combined income and think, we make too much to feel this broke, yet still hesitate before every unexpected expense. The numbers say they're prosperous, but the lived experience feels precarious, and that disconnect slowly erodes their sense of security. Understanding this dynamic is powerful because it shifts the question from why can't we keep up to what has our life become dependent on. Once you ask that, you begin to see that the real issue isn't just income level, it's the structure of commitments built around that income. A household that can function on one income has options, breathing room, and the ability to absorb shocks. A household that requires two full incomes at all times may earn more, but often lives with less flexibility, less resilience, and more silent pressure to keep the machine running, no matter what life throws their way. So what do you actually do with this realization once it hits? Once you see that the real danger isn't low income, but low flexibility, that the true risk isn't earning too little, but structuring your life so every dollar is already pre-committed before it arrives, this is where the story shifts from diagnosis to strategy, because understanding the trap is only useful if it leads to a different way of thinking about money, work, and long-term security. The key mindset shift is surprisingly simple, but incredibly powerful. Start treating the second income not as a permanent guarantee, but as a temporary bonus, even if in reality it continues for decades. That single mental reframe changes how every major financial decision gets evaluated. Instead of asking, can we afford this with both incomes? You begin asking, could we still sustain this if one income disappeared for a year? That question forces clarity. It exposes which parts of your lifestyle are truly affordable and which parts are only affordable under perfect conditions where both careers remain stable and uninterrupted forever. This is what we can call the one income foundation. And it doesn't mean rejecting ambition or refusing to grow financially. It means building a life whose essential structure can stand on one income while using the second to create freedom rather than obligations. Imagine that same couple rewinding a few years and making slightly different decisions. They still pursue their careers, still work hard, still earn strong salaries, but when it comes to fixed costs, they draw a firm line. The mortgage is chosen so that one income could cover it if necessary. Not comfortably luxurious, but stable and safe. Instead of two brand new car payments, they keep one reliable car and delay the second upgrade. They choose a neighborhood that is good enough rather than perfect, understanding that good enough schools combined with engaged parenting, often matter more than chasing the most expensive district. At first glance, these choices may look like compromises, especially when peers are upgrading homes, cars, and lifestyles in response to rising incomes. Social pressure becomes the quiet antagonist in this story, whispering that success should be visible, that raises should be celebrated with bigger purchases, that a dual-income household should live like one. Resisting that pressure requires a long-term perspective that values optionality over appearance. Because every dollar of fixed cost you avoid today becomes future flexibility you can use when life inevitably changes in ways you cannot predict right now. When the second income is directed primarily toward building reserves instead of inflating lifestyle, something remarkable begins to happen over time. The emergency fund grows from 1 month of expenses to 3, then to 6, then perhaps to a full year. Retirement accounts start to compound, quietly turning present discipline into future independence. Debt shrinks instead of lingering, removing monthly obligations that once felt permanent. Each of these milestones increases resilience, and resilience is what transforms financial life from fragile to secure. Eventually, the couple reaches a point where one job loss, one health issue, or one career pivot no longer feels like an existential threat. It becomes a manageable transition.